bevo.com.
He's the father of thinking about thinking. He's the inventor of the term lateral thinking, and he's the author of many world best-selling books, including The Six Thinking Hats. Professor Edward de Bono, welcome to Bevo. There's a lot of education on leadership out there in the marketplace, but is there, in your opinion, 2 or 3 characteristics that, if adopted, would significantly increase the chances of a leader's overall success?
Well, I think a leader's got to look at 2 roles, really, in business. One is continuity. And most executives in business feel their job is continuity and problem solving. Keep doing what you're supposed to do and solve problems as they arise. That's one side. The other side is growth, development, new ideas, progress. And those are 2 very different functions. And sometimes, obviously, organizations have chief operating officers who do the continuity. And then the chief executive is supposed to do the vision and improvement thing. But keeping those both in mind, and too often chief executives think their job is just continuity and problem solving.
Yeah, because a lot of chief execs think that the chief operations officer does the operations, the chief executive does the vision. But what is it, do you think, that the CEO should do most of the time? What's the role of the CEO?
Well, I think it would be the people part is very important for the CEO. Who to work with, who needs promoting, how to get the best out of people, all that side. And then, obviously, the new ideas, developments, progress, whether it's in markets, products, simpler ways of doing things, all this thing. In other words, the CEO is supposed to do some thinking.
Last year you met with Richard Branson. Can you give us an insight as to why you think he's been so successful? Is it because he outthinks the competition, or what is it?
Well, to be fair, when you meet Richard Branson, he's a very nice, very genial, smiley, low-key fellow. And there's no way you could walk away from the meeting saying, you know, this fellow has a company, his organization has a turnover bigger than Coca-Cola. Because he's just a very pleasant, genial fellow. I had breakfast with him last year at TED conference in California. Very nice fellow, but you can't sense. The same with Bill Gates. You wouldn't sense this guy runs a rather large organization.
Dr. de Bono, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are just launching their businesses now? Is this a really bad time to launch?
Well, there's different types of entrepreneur. There's entrepreneurs who say, I'm going to do what other people are doing, but I'm going to do it cheaper or better or something. There are entrepreneurs who say, here's a really new idea, and I believe I can make it work. And there's entrepreneurs who say, I'm going to do the same as everyone else does, but I'm going to do it in a part of the world or country where they're not doing it. And there's different things. In other words, for some of them, there's a need for the new idea. For others, no, there's a need more for competence, energy, determination. I once wrote a book on, it's called Tactics, on interviews with very successful people. And the 2 things which came out of it, because some of them were tough people, some of them were shy people, some of them were ruthless, some of them were sensitive. One is single-minded determination, and the other is expectation that you would succeed, you would get there. Not expectation that it would just happen to you, but that you would get there. Like a mountain, yes, I shall climb it. So single-minded determination and expectation, you would get there, and every little blip or problem or ditch on the way was there to be crossed. Those are the 2 things which came. These are very successful people who made it, yes.
Yeah, because I read that book, Tactics, and it's a brilliant book. In the book, you say there's sort of 4 key areas that will most likely generate into success, and you mentioned those to be lucky, a little mad, talent, and a rapid growth field. So I understand 3 of those areas, but could you just tell us a little bit about the a little mad? What's that all about?
Well, you see, when you do something which is different from the way other people do it, or look at it differently, then by definition you are mad. If you prove that your madness works, then they have other adjectives. But at first, it's mad. I mean, similarly with my lateral thinking. If provocation, where you say something which sounds absolutely impossible, I'll give you an example. I was talking to the ecology group in California, about 700 people, and they said we have a problem with rivers and factories on the river put out pollution and people downstream suffer. So using provocation, and the word I invented, PO, provocative operation, PO the factory is downstream of itself. It sounds pretty mad. How can it be at A and B at the same time? From it comes a very simple idea that we legislate that when you build a factory on the river, your input must be downstream of your own output. So you're the first to get your pollution, have to be concerned in cleaning it up. And I'm told, I don't know how true it is, that's now become legislation in 30 countries. Very obvious. But at first it sounds mad. How can it be downstream of itself? Another one really is what sounds very mad, and I was talking about this to Boeing engineers. PO, a plane should land upside down. Sounds mad. I mean, how can you possibly get anything useful out of that? Well, plane lands upside down, the wings give you downward thrust. So from that we get the idea. You have a normal plane and you have two small winglets upside down, which give you downward thrust. Now what's the value of that? The value is you have a negative bias. And if you need extra lift in an emergency, you just cancel those winglets by flapping them up or retracting them. And instantly you get extra lift. And 70% of air crashes are caused by the inability to switch on lift instantly. And here you have a way of doing it. So from starting with a plane landing upside down, ending up with a very interesting idea.
It's been said that one of the key ways to outperform the competition is actually to simply outthink them. Certainly one of the cheapest ways of doing it. So is that the reason why, out of all the sectors of society, business is one of the ones that's embraced your ideas the most?
When I wrote my first book, which is not about business at all, the business sector were the first to be interested in thinking. And that has been my experience. Business sector is more interested in thinking than any other sector of society. Because in business, there's a bottom line, there's a real test. You can prove you're right in an argument, be bankrupt next week. There's an actual reality test. In other areas like politics, it's enough just to persuade people that you're right, and that's all you need to do. You don't really need to think very much. So it upsets a lot of people when I say that business is more interested in thinking than any other sector of society. But it's true.
Okay, and do you think that CEOs are spending enough time thinking about thinking?
The answer is no. I remember talking to a major bank, and from what they said, they probably spent 1 day a year on what I might call creative thinking. All the rest was administrative, operational stuff. So the answer is no. People do not spend enough time deliberately on creative thinking, possibilities, opportunities, and so on. They do not, definitely do not.
And do you think the internet has had a detrimental effect to thinking?
Well, probably yes. What happens, for instance, with youngsters, you give them computers and access and internet, and they start to believe that you don't need to think, you just search for the answer. And also there's the danger with the internet that you learn what everyone else is doing, and you say if everyone else is doing it must be okay, rather like the credit crunch and the toxic mortgage assets. Everyone else is doing it, so it must be all right.
There's been a lot of people that have benefited from your creative thinking workshops. So could I just be a little bit cheeky and just ask for you to give us the sort of 2 or 3 minutes on the fundamentals of getting good creative thinking within the organisation?
The key point is that for 2,400 years we've done very little about thinking, since what I call the GG3, the Greek Gang of Three, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Even worse than that, at the Renaissance, when Greek thinking came to Europe, people running schools, universities, thinking were church people. They didn't need creativity, they didn't need design, they didn't need perceptual thinking. All they needed was truth, logic, and argument to prove heretics wrong. And that became the core of education, leaving out creativity, design, and so on and so on. So the habits of thinking are very much concerned with judgment, not enough with design. How do we design the way forward? And design means using what we have to deliver the values we want. Almost totally absent from education at school or university. And so executives and chief executives were brought up on that. They're very good at it. And when they get to chief executive role, they're still using it. But the other aspects, creativity, design, perceptual thinking, very key, which are not developed. So there's a need to deliberately make an effort to say we're going to spend 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, maybe 1 day a month, really sitting down and trying to generate new ideas. The other danger, which is growing and which is huge, people start to believe that information is enough. So they put all their information into their computer analyzes it, that sets their strategy, makes their decisions. Very, very dangerous. And I've seen that happen with major corporations worldwide. Because unless you can develop new ways of looking at the data, then you're trapped in the old concept. And the computer will only apply your old concepts.
There'll be some people thinking that, yes, actually, this is an area of weakness for us. We need to improve our creative thinking in our organization. But how does a company go about actually practically doing that?
Well, there's three sides. One is to take creativity seriously and to realize it's a skill which can be acquired and developed. The other is to get some training for your people in it. And the third is to devote some time and some targets, saying, okay, here's some time, and we want new ideas in this area, and this area, and this area. Well, those three things are important. But people tend to think, oh, creative is just a magic gift, and we'll try and employ creative people, and nowadays, now and then they'll have a crazy idea, and we'll listen to them, and that's enough.
Do you think with the abundance and business information that there is, that there could be a problem in that we'll have information overload and it will actually stifle an executive's ability to have clear creative thinking?
The danger is, in our logic culture, we don't have an expression which says excellent but not enough. And it's rather like in a motor car, the rear left wheel may be excellent, nothing wrong with it at all, but it's not enough. So our existing thinking is excellent. No way am I saying it's bad, but it's not enough. So people who've risen in their career and so on through excellence in existing thinking, information analysis, problem solving, logic, when they get to a senior position where it is necessary for them to do some additional thinking, their whole background and skill is in other thinking. Logic, development, information analysis. It's not their fault, but that's the way it is.
What about forced idea generation? For example, I've got a friend of mine that takes his team of 10 people, management team of 10 people, into the London Eye every month and gives them an impossible objective or goal or whatever. And each of them, left-brain thinkers and right-brain thinkers, have got to come up with at least 10 ideas before they can get off the London Eye. And if they don't, they've got to keep on going on it and around it until they do. Is that type of pressurized thinking the right way of getting great ideas?
The deliberateness of it, yes, is excellent. In other words, time for being creative, certain targets, and what I suggest to organizations, what I call a creative hit list, which could be on your intranet, on the bulletin board. We need creative ideas in these areas, not only problem areas. That's a huge point, because our whole idea is thinking is for problem solving. Not true. You may look at something which is excellent and say, that's excellent, but maybe we can change it. 1970, I was doing some work for Shell Oil, and I said, when you drill an oil well, you drill it straight down. I said, that's excellent, but why not drill it horizontally at a certain level? Nowadays, almost every oil well is drilled like that, because you get between 3 and 6 times as much oil, because you're going through the oil-bearing stratum, not just dipping through it. In fact, Statoil in Norway has one well going 10 kilometers horizontally. But for 80 years, everyone was very happy, very satisfied, you just drill straight down. And many excellent ideas need challenging, saying, yes, that's excellent, but maybe there are other ways, better ways.
That's interesting, because you're right. A lot of the thinking goes on, lateral thinking goes on in problems, and everyone says, are you a good problem solver, as opposed to...
No, problem solving is only one part. You can look at things which are not problems at all and say, yes, we do it this way, but maybe there's another way to do it, yes. I mean, it's rather like I wrote a book on simplicity some years ago, and I said, when you leave the United Kingdom, why do you need passport control? If you catch someone who's overstayed his or her visa, you arrest them, you haul them back to court, you spend a lot of money, then you deport them. If they're on their way out, just say goodbye. And 3 months later, they abolished passport control. Now, I can't prove it's someone read my book, but chronologically, that's what happened.
So it's a great point. So it's not just talking about creative thinking for problem solving, but also using creative thinking to enhance things that are already working.
It depends what you mean by, you can have a brilliant idea, you can develop it further, develop full potential in that idea. That's one way of going beyond it. The other, of course, is changing the idea. Both have a value, yes. And when I'm talking about creative, I'm not saying other sorts of thinking are not valid. They are. Market analysis and so on is perfectly valid. But this is additional. It's rather like when you're driving a car, you may have 3 forward gears and someone comes along and says, okay, we're going to give you a reverse gear. And you say, well, that's very useful. When I'm stuck in a situation, I can use it.
A lot of people, I think, maybe confuse thinking creatively with just thinking differently. Is that the same thing?
Many people believe that to be creative, you've got to wear a funny tie and so on. And in the art world, that may have value, but generally, creativity has to have value. It's like if someone says, doors are normally rectangular, I'm going to make a triangular door. Isn't that creative? And you say, but what's the value? Unless there's a value, it is not creativity. In fact, I've invented another word for it. It is crazytivity. Just being different for the sake of being different is crazytivity.
You mentioned in your book about the concept of a new ideas champion. You mentioned it was particularly well used in DuPont. So can you just tell us about what the role of a new ideas champion is and how it can be measured by the organization?
Well, the story with the DuPont was there was a fellow there called David Tanner who came to a seminar I gave in Toronto, became very motivated. He invited me down to speak to DuPont on several occasions, to all the different groups and so on. He essentially became the ideas champion within DuPont, arranged for training, set targets for people. Now he's left DuPont, is working on his own as a consultant. But he became the fellow who people went to with ideas, who would talk to people who had ideas and so on. You need someone who's specifically concerned with looking after ideas, listening to ideas, taking them further, putting the person with ideas in contact with the person who can do something about it, all that sort of thing. Because otherwise it just doesn't happen. Very often people with ideas don't have the political skills to know who to talk to, how to present the idea and so on. You need someone on the side of the ideas person.
To what extent has the CEO, do you think, got to back creativity for it to really work in an organization?
In my experience, unless the CEO shows an interest in creativity, it simply does not happen. It's very difficult to drive creativity up an organization from some people in the middle or the bottom saying, we want to be creative for change, unless the CEO makes it clear that creativity is an expectation, that people are expected to have ideas, are expected to find simpler ways of doing things, then nothing happens. Because people do what they're expected to do. And if they don't see being creative as part of the rules of the game, they're not going to bother. It's too much hassle and too risky. So the CEO is essential in setting that tone, setting that mode.
New ideas are just that, they're new, so there's going to be an element of risk associated with them. So a lot of organisations may be thinking, with the economy as it is, this is not the time to take on more risk, we're in enough risk as it is. So tell me about the role of creative thinking in an economic downturn that we're in now.
You're quite right. People often think of new ideas as being new products, new services, and that's risk, that's investment, you're not sure it's going to work. But new ideas are just as essential in simplification, cutting costs, doing things in a better way. And that's not risk, and it's very helpful. So in times of recession, you may need a lot of creativity. How do we simplify things? How do we cut costs? And so on.
And that brings in the lateral thinking.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Talking about that, do you have any thoughts on what organisations should be doing more of in an economic recession?
Well, not specifically, but clearly they need to see how to survive in the recession. To be fair, a little bit cynical, many of them will use the fact or the imminence of recession as a good excuse to get rid of a lot of staff, which at other times might be difficult to do, but to say, no, recession, we've got to lay off 5,000 people, and I'm sure that will happen. I'm not saying I encourage it, but that will happen. So rethinking the organization happens, and doing things in a simpler way, important. And also looking for new alliances, perhaps, yes.
Could you just give us an example of any ideas using your lateral thinking that you come up with to solve any problems in the last few months?
Yes, I was talking actually to someone, because I'm speaking in South Africa at Soccer X in November, which is, I think it's 4,000 people from all over the world, 90 countries represented. And in soccer, when there's a draw, you have extra time, and if there's still a draw, you have a penalty shootout. Now, penalty shootout is a matter of luck, or having one guy who can shoot penalties. So my idea is to reflect the whole game. So every time the goalkeeper touches the ball, that side gets minus a point. So at the end of the game, draw, extra time, if they're minus 50, they're minus 20, they win. Now this encourages shooting at goal, discourages passing back to the goalkeeper, and it reflects the whole game. And I was talking to this fellow who runs soccer, and he said, yes, he likes that idea very much.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, that's good for the next World Cup, and maybe that will give England a chance.
Well, maybe.
If there was one key point that you'd want us to take away about lateral thinking, what would that point be?
The key point is this belief, which people still have, that creativity is an inborn talent, and you just have to employ creative people or listen to the odd screwball and so on. And my whole point is that it is a skill which can be developed. Now, the difference, what I'm saying, what philosophers have been saying the last 2,400 years, is my thing is based on an understanding of how the brain works. In my book, The Mechanism of Mind, I described how the neural networks form patterns. That book was read by the top physicist in the world, Professor Murray Gell-Mann, who got his Nobel Prize for discovering the quark. Great support of the book. He commissioned a team of computer experts to simulate what I said in the book. He said, yes, it works exactly as you predict. He's been a great supporter ever since. And from that understanding, then I developed the tools of lateral thinking and other things. But from an understanding of how the system of the brain works, not playing around with words like philosophers. That's the key difference.
Innovation has been a buzzword for quite a while now, and a lot of organisations say, yeah, we encourage innovation. But it's not enough to have an intention of innovation. You've actually got to do something about it. What do you think are sort of some of the common mistakes that organisations make when they're implementing an innovation program?
Innovation is a bit like climate change. It's a bandwagon everyone wants to get onto, and all politicians say, we're very concerned with climate change, and managers say, we're very concerned with innovation. And very often it's lip service. Nothing actually happens. Now, innovation means putting into operation in your organization something which is new for your organization. But that idea may be used elsewhere, may be copied, borrowed, stolen, bought, but it's new for your organization. And that's good, that's excellent. But it's not quite the same as creativity, where you're generating an idea specifically for your circumstances. So innovation itself does not imply original creativity. It means putting into action something which is new for your organization. And that's excellent, I'm not talking against that, but it's not sufficient.
One of the quotes on Bono for business.com is a Deming's quote, and it says, innovation comes from the producer and not the customer. So can you tell us about that debate of whether innovation should come from the market and the marketing consumer insights versus the internal idea generation of perhaps even the R&D department?
Well, the motivation for innovation is within the organization. For instance, the willingness to listen to customers, it comes from within the organization. And generally, customers are quite good at picking out faults and what's wrong and something, but not very good at generating new ideas. But the motivation and the structure for innovation has come from within the company. I think very few organizations respond, even if there's a lot of customer pressure, very few organizations would respond.
What's the requirement for innovation in smaller companies versus larger organizations?
Small companies often feel that they have to innovate. They've got to be nimble on their feet. A large organization which is pretty static and doing reasonably well doesn't feel any great motivation to change. You see, complacency is the key problem. And the example I always use is this fellow who's intending to commit suicide, and he jumps off the top of a skyscraper, and as he passes the third floor window, he says, so far so good. Complacency is very similar.
Do you think that the financial crisis that we're currently going through is a byproduct of capitalism that's devoid of thinking and riddled with emotion and greed?
We can usually trust the honesty of bankers, not so the intelligence of bankers. And this crisis is entirely fault of intelligence. They believed that mortgages were very safe, which they are for an individual bank. You lend on that house. If they default, you've got that house which you can sell. But once you securitize it and it's all spread out, you don't know who owns that house. And it's no longer so secure. And also the other fault is they said, well, if you diversify, you reduce your risk. Yes. But if you diversify to people all within the same bracket, you're not reducing your risk at all. So there's some really poor thinking responsible for this crisis, just bad thinking.
So why do you think there was so little thinking, perhaps, behind some of the financial products that have caused us, that's got us into this great mess?
One of the problems with the banks is, like many organizations, if everyone else is doing it, it must be okay. So with the mortgage securities, everyone else was doing it, so it must be okay. So really just some better thinking individually, saying yes. And again, you could say it's like the game of pass the parcel with kids. You stand in a circle and you've got this pass the parcel round, and suddenly it goes bang and sprays you with dye. And as long as you're passing it along, you say, I know it's going to blow up sometime, but not for me. So it may be that some people thought these things were high risk, but they said, we'll live with it, maybe it'll hurt someone else.
It'll take quite a lot of courage for somebody at the top of an organisation to see a product portfolio that's making a lot of money and say, no, we're not going to use these because I'm now looking to the future and Armageddon's going to follow if we do.
It's very difficult for them to stand apart when everyone else is doing it, to say, no, we're not going to do it. That is very difficult, yes.
So it's the coming up with the new ideas again that brings the massive value.
It is. But in banking, it's really like passing that parcel around. And normally the parcels are okay, but occasionally they blow up.
Seems like they haven't read enough of your books.
Well, that is always the problem with executives, yes.
But it's interesting because I think, everyone's talking about China and the new rise of the economic powers in the East. But then I heard something even more scary just yesterday, actually. The Chinese are embracing your methodology.
Absolutely. The government is trying out my work in 5 provinces. If they like it, they're going to put it into 4 million schools. And when China starts thinking, the rest of the world is just going to be a tourist resort. So you better get out your Morris dancing costume.
Because I haven't worn that actually for a few weeks now. So, Dr. De Bono, I'm not sure if you're allowed to tell us this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Can you give us an insight into what your next book is going to be about? Well,
there's 2 things. The next book is the original title was going to be "It's Too Late and I Don't Care." 23 Reasons Why World Thinking is So Bad. The publishers thought the title's a bit negative, so the title may change. It may change to Is It Too Late or something. 23 Reasons Why World Thinking is So Bad, because it's mainly based on judgment, not design. That's the next book. But then there's another big project which will be launched in the next month or 2 months, my code. Language is very inadequate for describing complex situations, so it'll be on the net, published on the net, a code where you can describe complex situations very simply, very clearly, relationships and so on, and that makes it faster, more specific, and so on. For instance, suppose you're in a negotiating situation and you really feel we're not going to get anywhere unless you give up on some of your entrenched points and unless there's more benefits for me. Instead of saying all that, you say, I think we've got a 4-2-1 here. Everyone understand it.
Dr. De Bono, for the people out there that are unfortunate enough not to have read any of your books, and I'm not one of those, but for business leaders, if there's one of your books that you'd recommend they go and read straight away, what would that book be?
The 6 Thinking Hats, which is now very widely used, and I was told by a Nobel Prize economist last year, he said previous week, he was in Washington, the top economics meeting, they were using my 6 hats. That is very much in use. That is ways of having meetings instead of argument. But that is not so much the directly lateral thinking. Serious creativity is probably the one for the lateral thinking.
I understand it's been announced that 2009 is the European Union Year of Creativity. So how are you going to be involved in that?
One of the projects I have is I'm going to set up a palace of thinking. A big, iconic, impressive building to give thinking the importance and dignity it deserves. And then have periodic meetings, different people invited, different countries, tackling issues, problems, concerns within Europe or elsewhere in the world. So that's something I'm going to do next year in year 2009, Year of Creativity, set up a palace of thinking. It may be in Malta, where I come from originally. It may be in other countries which are showing interest. So to give thinking the really importance it deserves.
That's brilliant. And would people come? Would it be an educational environment? Would it be a centre?
Well, it might have an educational aspect. At the moment, it's more working groups, and each month there might be a topic, and people would come and focus on that and generate ideas, and also becomes a platform for new ideas. Many years ago, I tried at the United Nations to set up a creative group, creative think tank. Totally impossible. They said, we're only here to represent our countries, not to think. So they're not going to do it. And so there's a need for new possibilities, new ideas, in order to provide alternatives. It's a bit like in Zimbabwe with Mugabe. Now, what they could have said is, Mugabe, you are the father of the nation, very important. We're going to give you a magnificent palace, magnificent income, car, drivers, everything, and you will have that position permanently. But you just move aside from day-to-day politics, which I think he would have accepted. But to say to someone who's been important, get lost, there's no way. In other words, we don't use design enough, creativity enough. And the UN can't do it, so I want to set up a separate organization which will be a platform for new ideas.
And that's fantastic. So it would be solving world problems at the moment in political, economic, government?
Let's say giving alternative ideas on problems. I mean, I'll give you a little example. I was mentioning the other day, a mayor in Australia came to see me once, said, I've got a problem with commuters driving into our town. They leave their cars in the street all day, and people who want to shop can't find anywhere to park. Should we put in parking meters, which of course is expensive, maintenance? I said, what's the concept here? The concept is we want people to limit their own parking. I said, well, there's a much simpler way of doing that. You can park anywhere you like for as long as you like, provided you leave your headlights full on. Now, you're not going to leave your car there for more than 5 minutes because you're running a battery flat. So you park, you rush into the shop, rush out again, move on.
Dr. De Bono, thank you very much for appearing on Bevo. That was a fascinating interview. Thank you.
Bevo.com